to go? All right, we'll go ahead and reconvene the Wildlife Commission meeting here in Reno now that the rest of the commissioners have joined us. Commissioner Valentine, who is on time today, will have the obligatory ass chewing for running late. But I lost a bet to him, so you guys are all going to owe me. We'll pick up with item 16C, Humboldt County Elk Management Subplan Update, Commissioner Drew and Morai and Game Division Administrator Brian Wakeling. The Humboldt County Elk Management Subplan Steering Committee met recently, and a brief summary of the meetings will be provided, as well as a report on the committee's progress. I was able to take in the last meeting. I think Commissioner Morai, that's the first meeting you had missed. I had actually missed the two prior meetings. And so it was a good opportunity for me to take a look at their working draft plan and see where the committee had gotten to in the absence of me being there for two meetings. I think they've got a good product started. I think they're struggling with some of the more difficult decisions at this point. They had initially identified some working numbers and population ranges that they wanted to work with. And had a lot of feedback, I think, from agricultural interest at the meeting that I didn't attend prior. And at this meeting, they had a lot of input from sportsmen's interest. And so we discussed a lot of different potential options, alternatives. I gave them some input from a personal basis, just from some of the questions that this commission may have when their working draft gets to us, just because they've been in it so much that I think there's certain things that when it gets to us, we're going to have questions on. So I encourage them to maybe give us a little more detail on their process and progress. I reiterated to them again that I wasn't so much worried about getting a draft plan at the 6-month mark, which I believe reads in our old policy, but that I wanted them to have a plan that they were comfortable with. And so they had set their next meeting for December 15th, and that will be in Winnemucca. And I can't remember if it was a 10 or 11 a.m. start time. Brian, had they gotten that to you? But it'll be an earlier start than normal.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not certain what that time will be either.
Yeah, I think they're going to start earlier in the day. They had been going at 2 o'clock, and I think they wanted to start earlier and go work through a working lunch. So that's where we're at. They do have a working plan that they're continue to work on, and I think they're still trying to establish what their herd objectives might look like. So I'm comfortable with the progress they're making. I know it's not an easy plan. I know it's not an easy process, but I think they're doing a good job, and I think they've come to grips with now getting down to some of the difficult decisions they're going to have to make as a committee. Commissioner Morai, did you have anything to add?
No, I think you pretty much covered everything.
Brian, you're good? Okay. Any questions from the commission? All right. Seeing none, we'll close item 16C and go to item 16D. Sage grouse update, Secretary Wasley. Secretary Wasley will provide an update on the status of the sage grouse. Tony?
Thank you, Chairman Drew. Sage grouse has obviously received quite a bit of attention of late. I don't really know where to start on this, but I will certainly entertain any questions. As I believe we reported at the last commission meeting, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service decision was that the sage grouse was not warranted for protection via listing under the Endangered Species Act. The reason why they arrived at that decision had to do with meeting the bar for regulatory mechanisms. In 2010, the service deemed the species warranted but precluded. Through a multi-district litigation, the service was required to arrive at a listing decision by September 30th. The service came to the states, the 11 western states that sage grouse occupy, and encouraged the states to meet the bar for regulatory mechanisms. One of the regulatory mechanisms, the primary regulatory mechanism that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service referenced in arriving at the not warranted decision was the BLM's land use plan. The BLM's land use plan carries with it certain restrictions, and those restrictions are now the subject of subsequent lawsuits and controversy, and that's the main thing that you're seeing in the paper and the media right now is what's contained in the BLM land use plan. Of specific concern, just a few of the items include disturbance caps. There's caps to disturbance based on a biologically significant area for sage grouse. There are land use restrictions that speak to mineral withdrawal in certain areas, limitations to development for industry, geothermal, wind, etc. There are also habitat management guidelines as those relate to grazing practices. And so there are some individuals that are concerned that the cure may be worse than the disease, as it were. And right now, a lot of the discussion is whether or not the restrictions in the land use plan are necessary, and are they better or worse than a listing. So at this point, the discussion continues, and there'll be a hearing next week on the injunction that was filed by NACO amongst others. Another part of the land use plan that has received some attention in the media has to do with the mapping that's in the land use plan. And what the land use plan contains is a habitat management category map that was developed by USGS. USGS was contracted to develop that map through the state of Nevada, through the Sagebrush Ecosystem Council. That map is not a species distribution map, but is a habitat management category map. It was never intended to be the final decider, but it was intended to be where discussions were initiated, and subsequent to that initial dialogue, the project level analysis would need to occur in order to determine if a project should occur, or what certain mitigation or provisions should be conducted in order to compensate for the impact. So at this point in time, the USGS is developing, that map was kind of a first draft, so the USGS right now is refining that map. They believe a lot of those course inaccuracies will be addressed in that second draft, which will be presented to the state for approval in early December. But again, even if no map is ever perfectly accurate for eternity, it's an evolution, so we still expect that there may be some inaccuracies, but once that dialogue occurs and we look at project-specific scales, we believe we've built flexibility in the system that allows us to operate on the landscape and have that discussion. So at this point, lawsuit will be heard initially next week. Ongoing discussions. The governor certainly is aware and is engaged with Interior, and a lot of these finer details are being discussed. The governor will have a meeting with the Secretary of Interior in early December to talk about flexibility in these areas, and we'll just keep monitoring it. And I don't really know what else to say beyond that right now, but I'd be happy to try to answer any questions if there are any.
Questions for Director Wadsley? Commissioner Valentine?
Thank you. Director Wadsley, can you kind of expand on what exactly would transpire as far as a listing goes of the sage-grouse and the effects that it would have on sportsmen in Nevada?
Sportsmen, I think the effects on sportsmen would probably be less severe than the effects on private landowners. And so I can't think of any species that has been as far ranging as the sage grouse are, that encompass the seasonal, from where they are in the winter to the summer to late brood rearing. They're truly a landscape scale species. So this is really one of the challenges. When people say that they'd rather have a listing than these land use plans, I don't think they have a realistic view of what a listing would bring. And for private landowners who have habitat in habitat that could be designated as critical habitat, it would require consultation. Anything that could cause a taking of sage-grouse, the incidental killing of sage-grouse, would require consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So if Commissioner Wallace wanted to cut his hay and his private land was in what would be designated as critical sage-grouse habitat, he would be required, prior to firing up his swather and going out there, he'd be required to consult with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as would everybody else who has hay and any other actions on private lands. And so I think it's really important to recognize the restrictions. Really, what some of the challenges we have is we have so much federally administered land, with 85, give or take, % of federally administered land. At this instance, I think that there's, I guess, 2 points of discussion. One is, as a regulatory mechanism, is the land use plan, it meets the services requirement for a regulatory mechanism, but how does that compare to the state plan and the conservation credit system? So we're looking at which regulatory mechanism is better. And if that regulatory mechanism goes away and then we look at a listing, then the question is, are we better off having regulatory mechanisms on the 85% of the land that's federally administered, or subsequent listing and how that would affect private lands? So from a hunting standpoint, I look at the Lahontan cutthroat trout, for example, that are listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, and we can continue to harvest those, we can fish for them, and we have agreements with landowners, pre-listing conservation agreements, safe harbor agreements after listing, that allows them to conduct business on their lands as they were previous. I think that the restrictions on private lands and private landowners as a result of the listing would be far greater than impacts on sportsmen or women.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Okay, seeing none, this is in our informational report section, so there won't be any additional comment. We'll close 16D and move to 16E, Department Activity Report. Secretary Wasley, Director Wasley will provide a report on recent department activities.
Thank you, Chairman Drew. And I guess I'd like to start off and just say that it's unfortunate that we don't have more people in attendance today. That we had an issue yesterday that put a lot of people in this room, but as I look around the room and I look at the video monitors, I think I can count maybe 5 people all told. We're all members of the general public, but I can see maybe 5 people present that either aren't department employees, cab members, or members of the commission. And it's part of the value in this is to share with a broader public of who we are and what we do. And I think the number of people that we had in the room yesterday relative to the number we have today really, I guess, to me, is frustrating that we don't have, we as an agency, we have the statutory responsibility to manage 890 species. And we have a lot of people that are worried about one species on one day, but yet we as a department do a whole lot for a whole lot more species and a whole lot more habitats. And it's unfortunate that we don't have a greater desire for participation to share some of what's contained in this activity report. But with that, I'll begin to wade into, and again, this is a high level update. And I would say, you know, this is definitely a minority. This is by no means the majority of what each of these divisions are doing. It may represent 25% of what we're doing presently as a department, but these are activities that each division administrator has put on a list that they think is worthy of sharing, certainly with the commission, the cabs, and any interested publics. I'll start with the game division. USDA Wildlife Services was contracted to remove coyotes from a park within Carson City because of repeated attacks on pet dogs in the area. 6 dogs had been bitten and injured, whereas another 3 had been killed by coyotes or had to be euthanized after seeking veterinary attention. None of the dogs that were bitten had been on a leash, although 2 dogs were within a fenced yard abutting the park. City personnel have provided warnings around the park notifying residents of the risk and advising them of the methods by which to increase safety. Nevertheless, because public safety of the issue, 3 coyotes were removed that exhibited bold and aggressive behavior. Biologists continue to deal with bears in nuisance situations. A cub involved in one of these incidents climbed to the top of a tree before succumbing to the effect of a tranquilizer. With the help of the Reno Fire Department and a couple of giant hook and ladder trucks, staff brought the cub down to applause from a large crowd that had gathered, as well as news crews which covered the event. The cub was placed very close to its mother and sibling that had been released on site where the original trap had been set. Unfortunately, in other situations involving public safety in which bears have entered homes or put humans at safety risk, the department has had to euthanize 7 bears thus far this year. Nuisance wildlife calls don't just involve coyotes and bears. Game Division biologists responded to a call from Nevada State Parks at Echo Canyon concerning an aggressive tom turkey. The turkey was accused of damaging vehicles and attacking campers. It was identified that the turkey had become habituated to humans due to food provided by campers, but had only recently become aggressive. The turkey was located and trapped using the Munson snare technique, an innovative foot noose used when the turkey was lured close by. Cowboys may recognize this technique under another name known as heeling. It was then fitted with a large leg band for future identification and released about 15 miles south in another turkey-occupied area. The Game Division has contacted the Idaho Department of Fish and Game concerning the availability of Columbian sharp-tailed grouse to continue the translocation efforts into Nevada. Translocation effort from Idaho began in 2013 and has produced promising early results, but additional translocations are being pursued to ensure that the population has the best possible chance of establishment. These interstate translocations illustrate the importance of collaboration fostered through interagency working relationships developed through the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and similar affiliations. The Commission received a briefing on the town hall meetings. The Eastern region has been working to get contractors working on the Overland and Spruce habitat improvement projects, one for mechanical mastication of 1,500 acres of pinyon and juniper on Spruce Mountain, primarily for mule deer winter range rehab, and one for 67 acres of hand thinning of pinyon and juniper, primarily for sage grouse in the Overland Pass area. 2 separate contractors were awarded bids for each of these projects in mid-September for $380 an acre and $78 an acre, respectively. Work is expected to commence in early fall, winter 2015. The duration of the contract is approved through December 2016. These 2 treatments are contributing towards an overall target of treating 38,000 acres of pinyon and juniper between the 2 areas, which has been approved in 2 separate environmental assessments. Southern Region participated in a meeting with the Nevada Department of Forestry Honor Crew, Lincoln County Conservation District, and the Natural Resource Conservation Service on a tree removal project in Unit 231. This project is removing encroaching trees from about 40 acres of private property that has 3 flowing springs that are used by elk, deer, and sage grouse. Options for future projects and fencing opportunities were discussed as well. In response to a landowner's concerns over elk use on private land in northern Butte Valley, an email blast was sent to antlerless elk tag holders for units 104, 108, and 121. The intent of the emailing is to encourage hunters to take advantage of the elk herd in the north end of the Cherry Creek Range while helping to alleviate some of the ongoing private land depredation at the same time. Game staff attended the first Wild Sheep Working Group's Oversight Committee meeting of the WAPA Directors Approved Adaptive West-Wide Wild Sheep Disease Management Venture, also known as DMV. The meeting was held in Salt Lake City, October 28th through the 30th. The DMV is a collaborative effort of all the western states and provinces to provide management tools for improving wild sheep population performance in relation to respiratory disease. Through brainstorming efforts during the meeting, 5 experimental research projects were identified with the framework for conducting intensive monitoring of herds with and without mycoplasma, a leading source of respiratory infection in bighorn sheep. October 20th through the 24th, the Game Division conducted desert bighorn disease surveillance efforts in Clark and Lincoln counties in the 3rd year of continued effort to sample and test all herds in Nevada to identify their pathogen profiles, parasite exposure, and physical abnormalities, and to capture these to herd performance. compare these, to herd performance trend data. 14 desert bighorn sheep herds totaling 95 animals were sampled over 5 days with the help of a small Endow crew and volunteers from Las Vegas and Alamo, which included members of the Fraternity of the Desert Bighorn. The helicopter net gun crew conducted the captures, with the majority of the animals being brought back to a base camp to have consistent sampling methods performed on the animals. Herds that were sampled included the McCulloughs, Rivers, Muddies, Arrow Canyons, Gold Buttes, Virgins, Mormons, Meadow Valleys, Delamars, South Hykos, South Parox, North Hykos, East Paranagats, and Mount Irish. An attempt was made to locate and capture the few remaining bighorn in the Egan Range, but no sheep were detected after an hour and a half of survey by the capture crew. Variable forage conditions and body conditions were encountered, with a few herds having animals with visible nasal discharge. An ultrasound was used to determine pregnancy status on a number of ewes in most herds. Results from this testing should be available later this month. 15 ewes and their lambs were captured in the Gabbs Valley Range on November 7th. All yearlings and adults were radio collared. About 20 volunteers from the general public and sportsmen participated in the capture. Animals were translocated to the Garfield Hills. This is considered an experiment where bighorn sheep from a herd with positive herd performance with active mycoplasma in the herd were used as a source stock to initiate a new herd in an area surrounded by herds with the same strain type of mycoplasma with similarly favorable lamb recruitment. During November 14th through the 17th, there's planned disease surveillance effort of pioneering bighorn herds on the Nellis Test and Training Range and Nevada National Security Site. This is the first cooperative effort of the Department of Defense controlled lands. Herds adjacent to the NTTR, Bear Mountains Inspector Range, were sampled recently to identify the distribution of pathogens and possible disease transmission of herds. From the Fisheries Division, although the eradication project to remove northern pike from Bassett and Cummins Lake in White Pine County was very successful, water quality issues in Cummins Lake post-treatment have delayed plans to stock the reservoir with trout and largemouth bass. The low lake level for the treatment and lack of inflow because of the drought has created low dissolved oxygen and high pH that prevents fish stocking. Without more inflow, stocking may be delayed until next spring. Bassett Lake water quality has been good after the treatment, and it has been stocked initially with around 2,400 largemouth bass. This was a mixture of subadult fish with some adults that were spawned in 2016. Eastern Region staff also successfully treated JD Reservoir in Eureka County to remove northern pike at the end of September. This reservoir is on a private ranch, and the owners gave permission for the treatment. 14 staff completed the eradication in 1 day of field effort. Beginning the first week of October, we responded to reports of a fish kill at Rife Hatch Reservoir. This was primarily around the dam area and included most species, including carp, blackfish, walleye, wipers, and catfish. It wasn't unexpected because of the lack of inflow, and we've just been unlucky up to this point. The fish kill wasn't complete, but it was substantial. I heard earlier today that last night, Fisheries Division Administrator John Schoberg learned that there's actually a non-point source of chloride in the water, and the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection is trying to locate the source of chloride, and that the kill is probably more likely as a result of that contaminant rather than dissolved oxygen levels. The agreement to develop the Winnemucca Urban Fishing Pond is being finalized, and we should be able to stock the new fishery in spring of 2016. Humboldt County is leasing the property for $1 a year, and we will assist with the management and provide stock trout. Tiger muskie for stocking into Chimney Reservoir in Humboldt County have been ordered. Delivery of the 1,000 10 to 12-inch tiger muskie should occur this fall. Major series of storms that created a 1,000-year flood event in Death Valley also impacted Ash Meadows National Wildlife Refuge and Devil's Hole in Nye County. Roads were washed out, making the refuge essentially inaccessible, and major debris flow occurred on the shelf in Devil's Hole, but the pupfish seemed to have weathered the disturbance quite well. Staff has been working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Newmont to address concerns over relic dace in Goshute Valley. Newmont has hired a consultant to update information on the dace and develop a management plan with NDOW and Fish and Wildlife Service participation. This population of relic dace was petitioned for listing under the ESA in 2014 because of alleged threats from the Long Canyon Mine Project. Staff met last week with several other states and federal agencies to continue development of a range-wide conservation strategy for interior red band trout, which is a native rainbow. Red band occur in Nevada and several northeastern Nevada streams, including the Bruno, Salmon Falls, and Owyhee River systems. Flow from the main source spring at Gallagher Hatchery in Ruby Valley has recently and unexpectedly dropped, probably due to the drought conditions. It's a manageable situation, but it will cause some delays in development of our broodstock program because brood fish had to be moved to other internal raceways until the problem can be addressed. Through the end of October, the Department's Aquatic Invasive Species Program had performed over 450 full watercraft decontaminations at Lake Mead and Lake Mojave, including 90 boats at 2 major bass tournaments. The inspection stations will continue to operate through the winter season with decontaminations available 7 days a week by appointment. Based on experience this year, we'll increase emphasis on clean, drain, and dry, making sure all drain plugs are full, even for boats that don't require full decontamination. In northern Nevada, over 1,500 watercraft inspections were performed at several waters, and a full-time inspection and decontamination station was operated at South Fork Reservoir for the first time for a full season. In 2016, NDOW will operate stations at Lahontan and Rye Patch, previously run by the Division of State Parks, and will move the Wild Horse Reservoir Inspection Station to the Mountain City Highway outside of Elko to better contact vessels that might be moving from Nevada to the Columbia River Basin. The Habitat Division, due to persistent drought conditions, the Greenhead Hunting Club has elected to not issue hunting permits at the Carson Lake wetlands for the 2015-16 waterfowl season. Additionally, NDOW and the Greenhead Hunting Club decided it would be best to limit access into the property to protect the area resources and infrastructure. On October 19th, Overton Wildlife Management Area received some flooding from the Muddy River due to heavy rains. There was some damage to the dikes, the most moist soil units in multiple places, but none of the ponds received any major damage. However, the floodwaters deposited some silt on the A6 field and damaged some of the surrounding roads. Despite a very light wildfire season, we're currently coordinating with the federal land management agencies on 2015 wildfire restoration projects, and we'll be cooperating on projects in both the eastern and western regions. We completed our comments to the Bald Mountain EIS. Those were due on October 13th. We're expecting a record of decision for the Mason Valley Walker River Channel modification in the very near future, and we'll begin working to implement this cooperative project with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Great Basin Bird Observatory, and the Otis Bay Ecological Consultants. The project will restore river sinuosity on 2 miles of the Walker River through parts of the Mason Valley Wildlife Management Area. In the Law Enforcement Division, October 2nd saw a hunting-related shooting fatality in the O'Neill Basin of Elko County. This was the first such fatality in Nevada since 1998. The incident involved a Carson City man who was unloading a .30-06 rifle in the back seat of a 4-door pickup when it discharged and struck the driver of the vehicle who was standing at the driver's side door. Hunting seasons are in full swing and many big game investigations are underway. Several of these involve multiple elk killed on one tag or wrong sex elk and are keeping wardens busy. We also had a cow moose accidentally harvested on a cow elk tag. Eastern Region Game Wardens witnessed the illegal killing of a trophy bull elk at the Bedkey Ranch in Unit 081 with a Utah tag on the evening of October 16th. The investigation is ongoing and felony charges will be pending. Eastern Region Wardens assisted Elko County Sheriff's Office with the service of a search warrant in Lamoille for a report of a man hunting deer who was a felon with a firearm. Several firearms were seized in the search warrant and felony charges are pending. We've had at least 2 waste of game cases in recent weeks. An Ely game warden issued a needless waste citation for an elk hunter that left the majority of the elk meat on the mountain. Southern Region Game Wardens also issued a needless waste citation for a mountain goat hunter that killed a mountain goat near Elko and left the majority of the goat meat on the mountain. The conviction for needless waste of game animals is assessed 12 demerits and will result in revocation of license privileges for 3 years. Western Region Game Warden is wrapping up an investigation in which an individual obtained multiple licenses and tags using false information. They'll be facing charges for fraudulent information, being an illegal immigrant in possession of a firearm, and a felony charge for poaching an antelope in Humboldt County. The warden caught this poaching in progress. Now that boating season has been over for a few months, we're handling several requests for accident reports. Toxicology results recently came in for a fatal accident on the Colorado River at Laughlin in which a female operator collided with a river taxi. These results showed the presence of narcotics, tranquilizers, and a blood alcohol level of 2.3, nearly 3 times the legal limit. While the actual mechanism of death was ruled as a drowning, alcohol and drugs were clearly a factor. In the Conservation Education Division, the judging for the 2016-2017 Nevada Duck Stamp Art Contest took place on November 6th at the Reno headquarters office. The winning artwork featuring the bufflehead was submitted by Mark A. Thone from Shakopee, Minnesota. This year's contest drew 17 entries from 12 different states. In cooperation with the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, NDOW was able to send out a press release on a recent bull elk poaching in Lincoln County to all of the major media outlets in both states. The joint effort resulted in a large amount of coverage, including a piece on KUTV Channel 2 in Salt Lake City and an article in the Salt Lake City Tribune. Some of the evidence suggests that the suspected poachers could be from Cedar City or St. George. New conservation aids for urban wildlife began work in both the southern and western regions. The Southern Region Conservation Aid is researching past urban wildlife protocols and organizing the information in order to update those protocols. Humboldt County Shooting Park has been awarded a sub-grant from the Department's Hunter Education Shooting Range Program. The project will improve accessibility for the mobility impaired and general public by installing concrete parking areas, ramps, and pads in the current facility. The installations will follow the specifications of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The Humboldt County Shooting Park project was highlighted by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the International Hunter Education Journal in their fall issue. The article highlighted the range's grassroots efforts, volunteer support, and overall range development. Carson City Shooting Range has been awarded a sub-grant from the Department's Hunter Education and Shooting Range Program. The purpose of this award is to install one solar power security gate on the Rifle Range Road and use metal swing bar gates to close off the multiple two-track roads to give random access to the range from multiple directions. The automatic security gates will be located on the main access road to control the majority of traffic into the range. The location of the 5 metal swing bar gates and boulders to close the two-track roads will be done with input from the City Public Works, landfill and utilities operations, and off-road vehicle advocates. The improvements will add additional safety to the shooting range. From the Wildlife Diversity Division, diversity staff has spent the last several months wrapping up the 2015 field season, analyzing data and writing reports for federal grants. Additionally, staff have been working with several key partners on various working groups to include the Western Working Group of Partners in Flight, the Pacific Flyway Non-Game Technical Committee, and the California-Nevada Golden Eagle Working Group. Topics of conversation have included Farm Bill prioritization of pollinators and their indirect effect on birds, conversion of agricultural lands from flood irrigation to center pivots and the effects on waterfowl and other water birds, coordinating range-wide surveys for nightjars, short-eared owls, and yellow-billed cuckoos, surveying for and protecting wintering sites for long-billed curlews, critical habitat designations for yellow-billed cuckoos as required by the Endangered Species Act, and pursuing a multi-state competitive grant to support survey work and implementation of key conservation actions, coordinating with key partners in California on management of golden eagles. Field work focused on reptile night driving surveys in the Mojave Desert, continuation of radio tracking of Gila monsters, and a division-wide effort to survey pikas in the northwestern part of the state. Diversity staff also assisted with game flight surveys and checking on harvested animals. The Diversity Division, in partnership with the Conservation Education Division, promoted bats during International Bat Week. Bats were the focus of the department's weekly podcast. A press release with bat information was released. Staff participated in interviews, provided elementary educational talks, and issued a bat fact of the day. This was very well received by the public and promoted a group of species that are often misunderstood and feared. Staff attended the Clark County business meeting expressing concerns with external display of fishing licenses, and followed with emails to each Clark County commissioner expressing concerns with the revisions of specific articles for the animal ordinance of Clark County. As we heard earlier, I believe from the Clark County Advisory Board, that aspect of that ordinance had been dropped and it was no longer concerned. Every 10 years, states are required to update their wildlife action plans. Nevada is on the hook for reviewing some of the other states' plans. We're in the process of doing that right now. From the Operations Division, after 13 months of planning, the relocation of Valley Road and Kitski Lane headquarters staff to a new facility in South Reno is underway. Kitski Lane staff moved this past week, and the Valley Road staff will move next week. The move will relocate 80 Endow employees under one roof, bringing together staff from 2 different Reno locations who have been separated for the last 14 years. Regarding facility improvements, once the transition of the new headquarters office in Reno is complete, the Operations Division will turn its attention to renovations and other improvements of the new Winnemucca office, which has recently been assigned to the department by Division of State Lands. Located on our existing property and previously occupied by employees of Drawing, Inc., Northern Valley's Workforce Development Agency, our Winnemucca staff will share this much larger facility with Department of Transportation employees. Since the new federal electronic duck stamp sales process began on September 4th, the department has sold over 2,300 stamps. 9% have been sold by our regional customer service counter staff, 13% have been sold through our NWDS consumer site, and 78% have been sold by our license agents. And that'll wrap up my brief summary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, questions for Director Wasley?
I have a quick question I wrote down. I just was wondering about the bighorn sheep and the virus that I keep reading about, the mycoplasma, and how bad the virus currently is and what's being done to combat that out in the field.
Perhaps Administrator Wakeling can speak to that specifically. Your question was about mycoplasma, how bad it is and what's being done to combat that in the field.
Game Division Administrator Brian Wakeling, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Hubbs. Mycoplasma is an incredibly troubling infection that bighorn sheep have an incredibly difficult time dealing with. Where wild bighorn sheep have no natural immunities to the bacteria, it is very common, especially in domestic sheep and in domestic goats. And there's an awful lot of evidence that the original contraction from those is by wild sheep coming in close, and pretty much has to be nose-to-nose exposure with those other sheep. Once it becomes endemic in a population, and it's incredibly difficult to eliminate. Depending upon the population of sheep that you're dealing with, those bighorn sheep populations can exhibit a wide array of responses. Some populations have shown all-age die-offs, where you have die-offs of young, you have die-offs of the older age class animals, and the healthy ones as well. It creates a typically deals with multiple bacteria at the same time. So you may have there's a Pasteurella hemolytica, there's a the Mycoplasma ovonpneumoniae. And there's a variety of other ones that all kind of, it's kind of like a perfect storm, and it results in can be some really debilitating disease outbreak, respiratory pneumonia. In some populations, it may only be the younger animals that are exposed to it, or not exposed to it, the others are exposed to it. They're the only ones that actually come down with the respiratory disease and actually come down with it. There's an awful lot of research still ongoing in regards to that disease. We provided some animals a year ago to South Dakota State University to be part of a larger study. There's been an awful lot of research being conducted on it, trying to figure out why Old World sheep and New World sheep have such a different response. And not every population responds the same. Some, as I mentioned, have an all-age die-off, some have a younger age. One of the concerns right now is something known as a super shedder theory. In other words, you have a sheep that will come down with it, it'll be persistently infected, will not demonstrate any respiratory disease itself, but yet it'll continue to expose other sheep in the population to it. So it creates huge challenges for the agency when we're looking at translocations, trying to just even look at the distribution of sheep across the landscape, because we know bighorn sheep, especially the rams, will have intermountain movements at times, sometimes as much as 20 miles, sometimes more. And virtually every single one of our bighorn sheep populations is within 20 miles of another population. And so the risk of exposure from one population to another is really prevalent. This also plays a role in our determination of the water presentation you heard earlier today. If we choose to develop a water in an area, part of the consideration we need to take into consideration is what's the likelihood that this is going to expand movement of bighorn sheep between areas and expose other sheep. It's not a simple solution. We haven't found any way that we can, any inoculum that we could give the sheep that they would then be resistant to it. Even if we could, trying to distribute that in a wild population comes with huge challenges. And so it's been an ongoing issue for years, decades. It keeps, trying to find a solution to it has not proven easy.
Thank you.
Additional questions? All right, seeing none, we'll close item 16F. Excuse me, and go to 16F, litigation report.